Speaking in response to the House Resolution 2633, the effort to review the relationship with South Africa and potentially sanction leaders of the African National Congress and the Government of National Unity, spokesman for the African National Congress, Bengu Motsiri, had some pretty comical things to say, not the least of which was there are many Democrats, including those who were part of the anti-apartheid movements, who will stand up to caution Americans against supporting a president who wants to censor and undermine the sovereignty of other nations. I'm sorry. This is rich, coming from the party that claims the mantle of liberation when it did virtually nothing to end apartheid. They just glommed onto it and took credit for it. Many others, Helen Suzman, the Black Sash Movement, Steve Biko, and Black Consciousness Movement, the Pan-African Congress. The list of people is endless. Journalists who helped expose what was going on there. And then, of course, the jig was just up. The Cold War ended, and they couldn't sustain the whole edifice of security state. So, but of course, just a day or so ago, she claimed the mantle of liberation, which is comical in and of itself. But this is the same party whose legacy is necklacing and assassinating members of the Inkatha Freedom Party in an effort to bring the country into total conflict by creating a civil war in KwaZulu-Natal, the African National Congress. Perhaps its greatest contribution to the liberation era was the chaos it sowed in KwaZulu-Natal. You don't have to believe me. Listen to Dr. Anthony Jeffrey and others who've done the research and can prove this situation. Many of us remember this and lived through this experience, particularly those in the police watching the horrific things that ANC members did to other black South Africans. Well, that legacy dovetails very well with the legacy of the Democratic Party. Of course, the modern Democratic Party is the party of Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, of course, is the president who stole the land from the Cherokee, the Choctaw, Seminole Indians, and sent them on the Trail of Tears, many of them dying en route to the Oklahoma Territory, as he and his friends made a fortune off of land speculation from land stolen from peaceful Native American tribes who lived in harmony, for the most part, with their Anglo-Saxon neighbors. That is the legacy that begins the Democratic Party. This is also the party that seceded from the Union and tried to break America into to continue the institution of slavery. This is also the party that instigated, by and large, the domestic terror of the Ku Klux Klan in the 19th century. This is also the party that had the first president to segregate the federal workforce. I don't think most people realize this. The federal workforce was integrated until Woodrow Wilson became president, and then he segregated it during his term in the early 20th century. The same Woodrow Wilson, who also aired the first motion picture ever shown in the White House. Yeah, it's impressive. Except it was Birth of a Nation, a pro-lynching, a pro-Klan movie. Same Democratic Party. This is the same Democratic Party whose president got credit for being a great civil rights leader when he was opposed to it. It was actually his wife, and that, of course, became Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The same Democratic Party that when Eisenhower was president used its votes, particularly from the South, to prevent civil rights legislation from passing repeatedly in the 1950s. And then took credit for civil rights legislation that only passed in the 1960s because overwhelming Republican support in Congress was opposed by the Democrats. This is the Democratic Party that Bengu Motsiri wants help from. She said that the ANC would vigorously oppose an attempt to isolate it from the rest of the nation by reimposing sanctions against it. Reimposing sanctions against the ANC. What sanctions have been against the ANC? There have been no sanctions against the ANC. There's no reimposing. And it's not against the ANC. It's against leaders who've committed misconduct. And it hasn't even been passed. And how exactly are you going to vigorously oppose that, Bengu? How? She said, remember, we come from a history where sanctions were imposed against the apartheid system. Yeah, that's true. But also the ANC was isolated by some of those countries that were working closely with the apartheid government, including the United States. That's a lie. We gave succor and refuge to many of your terror-loving members who came here and attended our universities. So that's just nonsense. And also, the United States Congress overrode President Reagan's veto to impose those sanctions. Now, this article by Bongani Hans, unfortunately, has a little bit of propaganda in it. Let's just be clear about this. He states that earlier this year, Trump signed an executive order threatening to punish South Africa for Ramaphosa signing the Expropriation Act and the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act. Actually, that's untrue. That's untrue. He didn't threaten to punish South Africa. He simply ended foreign aid for an ungrateful political party, an ungrateful nation, South Africa. And it was because of the Expropriation Act, which he dramatically signed at Davos, not Bella, Bello wasn't even in the mix at that point. So that's factually incorrect. And then he says Trump also accused the country of orchestrating the genocide against Afrikaners. That's factually incorrect. As we saw in the Oval Office meeting, if you watch the video, when Trump was asked the question if he believed there was a white genocide, he said, I'm not convinced of that. Then when Annika Larson staged a question for Ramaphosa to interrupt his host, he said, what will it take for President Ramaphosa to convince you there isn't a white genocide? Ramaphosa interrupted him. Trump never claimed there was a white genocide. Not in that Oval Office meeting. He refuted it. And that's the truth. This is propaganda. And then the rest of the sentence, he says, whom he gave free entry to his country's refugees. That's simply factually untrue. He didn't give Afrikaners anything free. They can't enter the country freely as refugees. There's a process, and it's not for Afrikaners. Once again, propaganda, fake news. I would suggest that Bongani Hans do a little research, and if he's confused about the facts, unable to look up on the whitehouse.gov website the executive order, if he's unable to actually discern for himself what's going on, he's more than welcome to contact me, and I'll be glad to share with him the receipts to set him straight. So the ANC spokesman thinks that the Democrats will be the savior of the leaders of the ANC. The problem with that, my dear, is that last year, when a bill with less teeth in it and only about 6 egregious offenses against U.S. national security interests was introduced into Congress in a bipartisan fashion, which Tom Eaton rubbishes in his op-ed, when that happened last year, 60 Democrats voted with it on the floor of the House. Didn't go any further than that, but that's where it happened. This time in committee, the vote was 34-16 with 7 Democrats crossing the floor. Bengo Motsiri, if you think that the Democratic Party is going to save the leadership of the ANC, this approach is actually going to make things worse. Ask some of your fellow cohorts in your tripartite evil alliance what people think about the ANC in America, Democrats specifically, and the Congressional Black Caucus. Other than fools like Representative Jonathan Jackson, there's an awful lot of people in Congress on that side of the aisle that are pissed off at you for your conduct that runs contrary to U.S. national interests. The arrogance of the ANC is leading to the chickens coming home to roost. And it doesn't matter how much Bengu Motsiri vigorously opposes it, there's nothing she can do to stop it, because the ANC has burned every bridge on this side of the Atlantic and then blamed the Americans for torching the bridges. While we were simply trying to cross and be good friends, they burned the bridges. What say you, world? Cheers.